Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Boardmasters with me, Chris Mullins, and today I thought would be a good opportunity to do a quick review of the core set of the Lord of the Rings living card game, because if you saw the video last week, you will know that I defeated the Escape from Dol Guldur scenario, so I've now completed all 3 of the scenarios from this core box and showcased all 4 of the decks in the various videos. So I thought now was as good a time as any before I move on to the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, and I'm going to review it in the same format of all the other ones so far, so the 5 categories of art style and theme, component quality, accessibility, replayability and gameplay. And so I'll dive straight into the art style and theme. And Lord of the Rings is a theme I absolutely love, and I've spoken about it before. This, along with Legendary Marvel and XCOM, were one of the only games, well, this time last year they were the only games I owned, and they were all bought because of my love for the IP. So the theme is always going to be a winner for me on this. I really like the art style. Some of the cards are a bit meh, but most of them are really nice, and it only gets better throughout the sort of the newer expansions and things. But yeah, it's a big plus point for me in this as well. I think it's great. So it's a big win for me on those. In terms of component quality, I mean, it's hard to say because basically it's a box of cards and I love the cards. The tokens are, again, they're just tokens. They're fine. They don't harm the experience in any way. So there's no sort of flashy components or anything that is going to win it sort of big points, but again, the components it has work perfectly, and the art style on the cards is great. So it's an interesting one. Yeah, it's the components are perfect for the game, but they're not like ultra fancy flashy things. But that's still a big win for me in my opinion. In terms of accessibility, it's got a long setup and tear down time. It can take a while to get a game set up, particularly if you're moving on to a new scenario and you've got to sort out the encounter deck and everything, and that is an obstruction to it getting to the table now and again, because it certainly was, because as I said, I bought this I think probably 6-7 years ago, played it religiously for about 6 months, and then because of the setup and teardown time and the fact that I was playing solo, it just lost its place at the table basically, and I just found it easier to go back to a video game. So that is a negative against it. Also, getting hold of it's not the easiest. I think at the moment in the UK, cost isn't really an issue. You can get it £30-35 is the usual sort of price bracket. I think at the moment there's a couple of places you can buy it. I think is it Dungeon Cavern or Dragon Cavern have a couple of copies, and I think there's maybe 3 or 4 copies left on Amazon, but it isn't widely available. And I remember when I ordered it originally, it was a nightmare getting hold of it. It took 6 to 8 weeks, and bits to it got damaged and whatnot, and yeah, it was a long time getting hold of it. Putting that aside, in terms of the actual game, it is generally a medium to heavyweight game. So I think on Board Game Geek it's around a 3.5 out of 5 for the complexity. I think in general it's easy enough to keep track of in terms of the standard stuff. Once you get the order of the phases down, then it all happens quite logically. The difficulty that I find is anything that's sort of passive. So like, for example, in the Dol Guldur scenario, you have the Dungeon Torch, which means if you claim it, you have to increase your threat by an extra 2 per round, or the Shadow Key, that character gets an extra 1 damage per round. And I tend to forget that sort of thing because there's not something to trigger remembering to do it. Whereas everything else, it's either triggered by a keyword or unveiling an enemy or playing a card. So all of that sort of stuff is a lot easier than necessarily it looks to begin with. There's a lot going on, but as I said, most of it flows really naturally and logically. I guess for newer players, this is the sort of game that can suffer with analysis paralysis, in that if you're not familiar with the sort of decisions you need to be making, the number of decisions you're faced with and the strategies that are there can overwhelm. But if you stick with it, you'll get over that. In terms of replayability, well, I guess it's basically kind of endless. Obviously, it's a living card game, so they've been releasing new content, I think, every month for certainly 6, 7, 8 years after this was released. I think this was released in 2012. I don't think they're printing anything new at the moment, but there is an awful lot of extra content you can add on, and we'll be looking at the first cycle of that over the next couple of months. But even if you're just talking about the core set, from what I've featured on the channel so far, there's 3 scenarios, 4 basic decks in terms of each sphere. So you've got tactics, leadership, spirit and law, which all play very differently. And so you've got the 4 basic decks plus the 3 scenarios, so that's a lot of replayability there. But obviously on top of that, it is a deck building game, so you can mix and match and play the game to as long as you want, and in terms of creating new decks and tweaking and trying new things. So it's basically going to last as long as you enjoy the deck building aspect, really. But with that being said, I'm going to move on to the gameplay, and I really love it. To be honest, as I said, I've had it for 6, 7 years. I played it a lot for that first 6 months and then haven't touched it basically ever since, until I got it out with Kurt last September. And I'd really forgotten just how much I enjoy the game. I've thoroughly enjoyed playing it again. It just is a really fun game. I think it works really well solo or 2-player. I mean, some scenarios like Escape from Dol Guldur is notorious that it's basically impossible in solo, but I tend to enjoy playing it 2-handed, as you've seen on the channel anyway, and I haven't had any unsurmountable issues or anything with that so far. As I mentioned earlier, it is a deck building game, so it's one where you can be as creative as you like in experimenting with and putting together your own decks. I mean, I think my favourite aspect of it, because if you've watched the channel, you've seen I haven't done any deck building. I've just been using the sort of monosphere standard decks that were provided in the box. And I kind of think of it more as like an engine builder, where you're using your deck to create the engine so that you've got your allies and your attachment and your resources to build this engine so that you can deal with the threat of the encounter whilst questing and balancing all these different facets and things that you need to take care of. But I think you can see, certainly in my last Escape from Dol Guldur video, that if you can get that engine built up early, get allies out on a regular basis that can survive an enemy attack for more than one turn, then you're going to build that engine and you're going to have a lot on the board that's going to be able to wipe out even the most powerful enemies in 1 or 2 turns. Whereas like Journey Down the Anduin, when you're starting against a really strong enemy like a hill troll, it's really hard to get it moved quick and easy. So the fun of it for me is almost in that engine building thing, which isn't something I'd really picked up on in the rules or anything, because everyone seems to always focus on the deck building aspect. And yeah, just as I mentioned, there's loads of decisions that you need to make all the time in terms of what card do you play, who do you engage with, do you travel, where do you travel, all of these sort of things that are going on. And I just love that aspect of decision making. I love all the strategy that goes into it, and it's just a game that I've really thoroughly enjoyed playing again. And I'm really thankful for the fact that I started doing this, and it gave me an excuse to play it again. And again, I think it was DG, I believe it was DG, forgive me if I'm wrong, who commented on the first one asking for more Lord of the Rings. And to be honest, I wasn't going to do any more after Kurt wasn't able to come back, but I'm really pleased that he asked me to, and I did, because it's been great fun. But that pretty much covers everything for the core set. In terms of a score, I'm probably going to give this one a 9, similar to Dinosaur Island, because I do absolutely love it. It's just really the setup and teardown times that are the only negative for me, really, and it can be a big hurdle to get it to the table because of that. But I'm going to leave it there, and thank you very much for watching if you have, and I hope you look after yourself, stay safe, and have a good one. Thank you. Bye bye now.